My guest today is Vicki Hird. Vicki is an insect and invertebrate specialist based in Southern England, and she's out with a new book called Rebugging the Planet. And it's a fascinating conversation, looking at through the lens of somebody that's been in the invertebrate and bug space for many, many years, and the impact on regenerative agriculture and gardening and parks and recreation systems, and how taking a thoughtful approach to rebugging our planet literally is needed as we evolve with a growing population, a changing climate, uh, more efficient supply chain systems, and so much more. So I'm so excited and thrilled to be able to share this conversation with Vicki Hird, author of Rebugging the Planet. Enjoy. We are live. So, hey, everyone, thanks so much for joining us back here on another episode of the Regenerative Agriculture Club podcast. And the topic of insects and other invertebrates, incorporating them sustainably into market gardening and farming applications is an area that I'm fascinated with, but I certainly don't know enough about that. Thankfully, the guest that we have here is going to help us out with just that, because joining me here is Vicki Hird. She is the author of a new book called Rebugging the Planet, and we're going to be talking all things bug and insects today. Vicki, hey, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, like as I mentioned, this is such a fascinating area, and especially a very critical area, just because I think it's something that I know as I came up in the farming and gardening world that I just overlooked this whole, what I would call like this micro world of insects and invertebrates. So before we get into the book, I want to hear a little bit more about your work and how did you even get into the space?
Yes, well, I've been an environmental and food and farming campaigner for 30 years. I find it surprising to say that now. It seems incredible. I still feel young, but I ended up doing this because I'd done a master's in pest management, development of pest management systems, both in domestic housing, also in farming, and I'd investigated biological controls and things like that. But I didn't want to go into the business of killing bugs because I've always had a real passion for them. Ever since I was very young, I kept ants in my bedroom in an ice cream tub, things like that. I've always loved them and always done biology. So I ended up just thinking I'd be a journalist, but I ended up doing environmental campaigning and haven't looked back. And this book just sort of came to me when I saw some really frightening new data, long trends data of invertebrate loss. And I was also aware that there's a greater public interest in invertebrates and bugs. So I thought, putting the two together, why don't I write some tips down and share them on social media, and it ended up turning into a book. Just too long, too much to say. They're so fascinating, and there's so much exciting stuff to read about what we can do and what we can learn from bugs. So hence Rebugging the Planet was born.
Wonderful. So how did we get to this point? I mean, I'm here in the central part of the United States. You're in Southern England, and there's definitely some crossovers in terms of, just the rise of industrial agriculture and more chemical inputs into the environment. But, just from your professional work and the research that you've done, I mean, what have been the negative trends that basically have put us in this position where we need to be more conscious about rebugging the planet?
Yes, I think we spent so long, over basically a century and a half, in finding ways to kill the bugs, to keep them out of our stores, keep them out of our crops, keep them out of our bodies, that we've forgotten actually the vast majority of bugs are critically important for us, for our food, for our water, for our clearing up food waste, for all the other wildlife and ecosystems that we need. We need the bugs. They're the glue that keeps it all together, and they can move around so well that they can regenerate an area if it's been harmed. But they've been so badly harmed by issues like clearing habitats, clearing areas that they need to move through, like hedgerows and woodlands, clearing all those bits of scrubby. We like our agriculture to be very neat and clean and free of bugs, and that's all created such a huge problem for them. We've also polluted the water and the soil. We're increasingly noise and light pollution. All these kind of things have had a huge impact, and now we've increasingly got the impact of climate change affecting which bugs can survive where. And we're seeing from the data that some bugs, the generalists, can generally survive, but an awful lot of flies, butterflies, spiders, all sorts, the whole gamut. The ones that are a bit more specialist really struggle. And those are the ones that are doing our pollination, are doing our soil creation, and so on and so on. So we really need to tackle all those big harms that we're doing to the bugs in all sorts of ways, personally and as businesses, as farmers, and as politicians.
And you open up that topic too in the book. And then another area that I'm such a big fan of in Rebugging the Planet is just how we can teach children just these positive lessons about bugs. And so as a parent of two small children, I found this very fascinating. So for the parents of young children out there, what's your advice on that topic?
Yes, I've got a whole chapter called Rebugging Our Attitudes or Your Attitudes, because I think what we can do as adults is really instill the wrong kind of attitude to bugs in the young children we're caring for. And so they lose the curiosity and the joy they have when they see bugs and worms and all those crazy things that look so different from us and the animals they're used to. When they have that curiosity, it can really killed if you then say, oh, it's going to sting you, it's dirty, kill it, squash it, whatever. So us adults have a real opportunity to both change our attitudes and instill in the next generation an understanding that these bugs are really important for our lives. And there's a few that are a problem. Obviously, there's some that are a problem, but the vast majority are actually great and fun, and they're beautiful. I think invertebrates are beautiful if you look at them up close. And you have an opportunity to do that with your smartphones. You know, when you take a picture of a bug from a distance, you can't really see it, and then you zoom in, and it's extraordinary. So I think adults can do so much with doing bug hunts and changing their attitudes and reactions to bugs whenever they're around. All sorts of things I've put in the book of tips and ideas of how to get children understanding this better.
You know, one thing that I found fascinating is just, with the garden beds that I have on the small plot of land that I have here, in the years as I've been incorporating more living in soil and compost applications, to be able to go out in the middle of the growing season and just put the shovel down and just open that up and you see all that life in there, of like how much is in there. It's its own unique ecosystem. I find that incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, and I think children do too. I always remember the moment when my youngest came in. He was about 3, and his hand was full of wriggly worms covered in soil, and I was just absolute joy that he found that interesting. And another time when my son, it was actually in Canada, we came out of a lake, and one of them had a leech on his foot. And you might say, ooh, there's a risk there. But I didn't. I said, oh, my goodness, that's fantastic. And I was so enthusiastic about it because I think they're fascinating invertebrates that my other son went out back into the lake to try and get one attached to him as well. I'm not necessarily suggesting everybody would do that, but the bugs, as you say, in a compost, getting children to grow food, they can see the role that the bugs have in the soil creation. Centipedes and worms and springtails, all sorts of animals in there, not just insects. It's the whole gamut of invertebrates there.
So for the folks out there that want to get more actively involved in this space in terms of, just having a much stronger focus with it, it's in their own gardens, whether it's on their farms, let's say like a year one, kind of like the first initial steps, what would be your advice to somebody that really wants to take a more stronger approach to rebugging their own living environments?
Yeah, I think, one of the things I say is obviously read my book and read around.
There's step one.
Yeah, step one, yeah.
One.
And it's full of tips. It's full of tips. Lots of boxes, you can easily find the tips. But, think about whether you can leave some of your garden or your area or your holding to be more messy, to have less. I mean, certainly trying to cut down on the chemicals, that goes without saying, the chemical pesticides, but also the fertilizers, and building fertility in your garden or your holding yourself, but also leaving it a bit of it messy. And you'll very quickly see in that first year, the bugs start to use that messy bit, be it a pile of logs or some weeds, and calling them something other than weeds because they're beautiful and they're really important, and they provide refuge and food for the pollinators, which will then pollinate your crop, pollinate your flowers, and potentially get you your fruit and your fruit trees and things like that. So leaving a bit messy and cutting out the chemicals was what I'd do in year one, and having a bit of a plan to leave areas for the wildlife in your garden and not have it all beautiful, pristine lawn. I actually find a real monoculture lawn really horrible now when I look at one, because I know what it could be for the bugs, and it could be for us, and the noise and the joy you get from not just the bugs, that when you let them in, you get more birds and all sorts of other animals that you might want to see around, because they feed on the bugs. So it's important for all of the wildlife.
So, what would be your advice too on because you talk about this in the book with farming and gardening, but then also too like parks and other recreation areas? I would imagine that's probably yeah, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe that's a bigger challenge because typically those are overseen by committees as opposed to like somebody that has their individual smallhold farm where they can actually take ownership and do everything themselves.
Yes, I think getting involved, getting on the committee will be a start, and or becoming one of the friends of the park. There's usually local groups, voluntary groups that do things with the local councils, local authorities with the park, and get involved and ask them to cut back on the mowing, so you can leave some flowers to flower, so they can then reseed and provide a habitat and food for the invertebrates. But getting involved in your local park activities, and even the politics around your local park, because there will be people probably campaigning for a bee-friendly park or for a pesticide-free park. And it's also not just the parks, it's the road verges and other small scrubby places which can be incredible refuges and beautiful places for flowers, and yet they're usually just mown to be boring green monoculture. So getting involved, asking questions, looking on your local authority websites to see how you can get involved, and get involved in clearing spaces for nature and supporting those initiatives that some people will be doing. We have some great things like bee-friendly towns in the UK. I think you have them in America as well, actually. I'm sure I found some. They're in the book. And so more of those is a good thing.
What I really like towards the end of the book, you just have such a comprehensive list of resources, both in the UK and in the US. I think readers can take full advantage of that because as I was going through it, I just uncovered new things I didn't realize I didn't know, and then you see this whole resource and it comes together very nicely. So Vicki, I'm curious, do you have a particular favorite insect or group of insects that fascinate you the most?
This is really hard. It's very hard.
I imagine it is. It's like picking your favorite child.
I sometimes say the cockchafer. I don't know if you call it that there. It has many names. It's a very large, bumbling kind of beetle that we call it the June bug or May bug, depending on where you are in the world. And it arrives, and it can be quite destructive in a farm setting if you haven't got good rotations and good crops that can withstand it. But it's such a beautiful bug. It's got huge antennae, and it's a bit bumbling. It hits you because it can't see very well. But I also love the ants, and the ants can be incredibly important keystone species in an environment like in the Cairngorms in Scotland, where the wood ant provides a critically important role in keeping the systems going. And if you take away the wood ant and its nests, you end up leaving a huge space for a moth that can really destroy whole forests. So those sort of critical keystone bugs I love as well, because they're so incredible. And they're often social bugs that have incredible ways of communicating and working together that we could learn from, to be honest. I love the bugs. Yes.
How do you recommend just kind of like that delicate balance? Because we talk about ants, and when we have ants that come into our house, like our children may like spill some ice cream that we don't see this, and then you get ants all over that, and then instantly then we have that association. Well, that's a household pest, and we need to remove that. How do you counsel people on that delicate balance?
Yeah, the thing I learnt when I was doing my pest management degree, the number one rule of keeping pests out is stopping their means of entry. Taking away the food source and closing the means of entry. And those are by far the best ways, because if you start looking into chemicals and things like that, it starts getting out of control, and you can be harming the good bugs as well as the ones you want to keep out. And one of the things I talk about in the book is the smell. You talk about the ice cream. Ants have got brilliant ways of detecting food sources. So you can baffle them by putting unusual smells. If you think you've got an area that you can't close off, you can spread it with a particular smell, like a peppermint spray, oils and things like that, which they don't like. Look in my book, there are examples, and that will put them off coming through. So ideally, close off any entry points and remove the smells and food that they would like. Those are by far the best ways than killing with chemicals.
How is a changing planet environmentally? How is that impacting the bug's life that you've seen over the years?
Yeah, there are some very worrying studies on certain bugs. As I said, the generalists have a potential to, because bugs can reproduce very quickly and tend to evolve or move to where they need to go. If it's got too hot, they'll go north, and we are seeing that with some bugs. If it's getting hotter, they'll move into a different area if they can't cope. But other bugs can't do that, and particularly the non-flying ones. And there are studies which I found when I was researching my book about worms being badly affected by heat extremes and obviously drought. You get extremes of temperatures and extremes of water, either absence or presence. Flooding can be a big problem for the bugs as for the rest of us. So, like for us, it's a real problem for the bugs, and we really need to decarbonize our industry, our homes, our transport in order to get a grip on climate change for all of us and for the invertebrates, because we need the invertebrates to be able to survive where they are now and to do what they do for us now in terms of our crops, pollinating our crops and keeping our water clean and things like that. So climate change and making sure nature is not further damaged. There's habitats, there's wild places. We need to keep them for all sorts of reasons, but not least keeping the invertebrates available as food sources for the invertebrates. Yeah.
You mentioned food sources. I'm glad you brought that up because I probably hasn't quite reached the westernized palate quite yet, but certainly in other parts of the world, bugs are considered food, and they have for many years. And certainly with a growing global population that is in need of more sustainable sources of food, and especially protein. What trends do you see in that area with kind of the culinary aspects of insects?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's 2 billion people around the world who regularly eat invertebrates. But we all eat invertebrates when we're having prawns and crabs and crustacea, but the water invertebrates, but land-based ones, it's not quite reached us in a big way. But we do have products available on the shelves which are made with cricket powder. And there is a huge amount of investment going into creating large factories of things like black soldier ant, and the maggots of the black soldier ant, they create them very quickly. They can feed on anything, and they can create vast amounts of protein powder, potentially to feed animals instead of using soya. And that soya production, which is incredibly extensive across the US and across southern America as well, in Brazil and places like that, where it's causing massive deforestation. But I do talk about the book, I talk about the thing that we really ought to consider the ethics of it and whether jumping into a whole new monoculture is the right way to go. And could it potentially be making things like factory farming, really intensive, polluting factory farm systems viable as soya becomes less available? I don't think that's the way we should go. We should be reducing our take on the planet and sharing the land, but also treating, if we are going to grow and rear animals for ourselves, we should be making sure that there's rules in place for ethical treatment. I think they have feelings. They're not the same as us. You might say, we have feelings in a different way than the bug does, but there is a lot of evidence that they have sentience. They even have parental feelings and things like that. When I investigated, there's a parent bug which looks after its babies very well. It's a type of cockroach, shield bug kind of thing. But there are many instances of invertebrates looking after their young, and they obviously, in the social insects, they're really amazing at working together to protect the colony. Incredible sentience, I think, just different. But we should have, if we're going to rear them, we should have really careful ways of doing it in ways which are kind to these animals. And if when we're slaughtering them, we're doing it in a way which is kind. But overall, I think going headlong into a new industry like this is very dangerous. We've been there before. We've done wrong things, and I could point at aquaculture as being an area. We're breeding fish in fresh water in such numbers, it's causing such problems. And I don't think we should be doing the same with insects. But there's a way. I think there's a way to do it, and we should be looking to alternative proteins. So just want to have the right rules in place to make sure we don't harm the environment and do things unethically.
A topic that I saw a couple times that you mentioned in the book is supply chain systems and how So I wonder if you can kind of expand a little bit about that, of how rebugging the planet can help us with just more efficient and effective supply chains.
Absolutely. No, it's a really interesting area of supply chains, and a lot of people are beginning to appreciate that right now because of COVID and all. And here in the UK with Brexit, we've got big problems with our supply chains and fuel. I think, ultimately we're going to find fuel is going to get a lot more expensive. So the less fuel that we need in order to get our food, the better. And ways of doing that are using less fertilizers, which use fuel for the systems, and more local and regional food supplies. Because the kind of systems, the farming systems that really support in the invertebrates, the ones that are more diverse, that are using less chemicals, having more habitats and more rotations, and all those kind of things which any farmer knows will actually help them to reduce the inputs on their land. And that requires a more local and regional supply chain. So we need to invest in small-scale abattoirs, small-scale processing, and local systems, and people being able to buy their food direct from farmers. I think, we've got this incredible opportunity with direct sales, with digital now. As long as it's in electric or low energy vehicles, we could actually see a really important way for farmers to reach their consumers more directly and have a more responsive consumer base or responsive supply base, which will allow them to do things in ecological ways and protect the bugs. So it's a complex picture, but I think we know that the supply chain is the centralized, just in time, heavily based on monoculture supply chains we've got now are not sustainable. So we need to invest in more regional and local supply chains that support farmers and consumers. So lots of complex changes are needed and investment too, but it could help the bugs if we got that right.
Vicki, I just have a couple of last questions here, then we'll let you go. But I guess one, and you kind of touched on this in the book, and I want to hear listeners hear it in your words. But what does a rebugged planet look like in your worldview?
Yes, it was actually wonderful because my publishers asked me to write a small chapter on that, envisaging if we actually got this all right. And it was, I was talking about the smells and the sounds and the vision of a more rebugged street as you come out of your front door. Well, you go into your garden and that's full of more birds and bugs and colour from flowers and more diversity and less boring lawn. But then if you go out your front door or your flat or your apartment, you see in the the curbside, you see flowers and you see bugs rising up, and you can hear more birds because they're eating the bugs, and they're eating the seeds that the bugs are pollinating the plants for. So as you walk down the street, it's more beautiful. And when you go to places on holiday, like the rivers, there's far more life in the river, and there's bugs above the river, above the water, that the swifts and the little birds that come down and feed on the aquatic bugs are having a field day, and you see this beauty of wildlife restored, because one of the key linchpins of the system, the invertebrates, have come back in numbers and diversity. And that's key. It's not just the numbers. We need that diversity. So you need diverse habitats. So you've got more trees, you've got more flowers, you've got more shrub. And America, you've got your beautiful wilderness areas and your parks. Those are fantastic refuges. Ideally, you'd have more refuges in towns and cities as well. Little maybe tiny forests. I talk about the tiny forest movement, which is about getting little forests into urban settings, which can be hugely beneficial for reducing temperatures and things like that in urban areas. But there's just more colour, smell, joy and life to see, and I think it would be great if we managed to do that everywhere.
That's a lovely thought. All right, last thing, Vicki, then we'll let you go. Where can people follow along with your work? What can they pick up a copy of the book and just become more informed about the work that you're doing? Yeah,
I hope people do like the book. You can get it at chelseagreen.com. They're the publishers, and most bookshops and Amazon are all selling it, and good bookshops. I've also got a website which I've got some of the tips. It's www.rebuggingtheplanet.org, and I also share my photographs from my tiny garden, which show just the diversity you can have. If you share your garden with the bugs, you can get an incredible diversity of bugs. And I photograph them and then I zoom in and you can just see how beautiful they are. So I've also got blogs and things on there. And my work during the day usually is around farming and food, and that's with sustainweb.org, which is, all sorts of areas around the food and farming system which need to change. So do look at all the tips online and in the book, and get rebugging if you can.
Love it. All right, we'll link all that up in the show notes so people can easily access. And we'll continue to stay in touch and follow along the work of Vicki Hird. And Rebugging the Planet is the book that you all need to read. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.